Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Egg Whisperer Show. I am so excited to have a special guest tonight, Dr. Diane Tober from UCSF Institute of Health and Aging.
That's right.
And that's not just all you do. I mean, you're a very, very busy woman, executive producer of a movie, right? You're a filmmaker.
That's correct.
And
yes.
book author. Tell us more.
Wow, tell you more. So yeah, I've been working on a film on egg donation for the past 4 years. I've just finished completing my book, Romancing the Sperm, Shifting Biopolitics and the Making of Modern Families, based on my research in the 1990s with sperm donors and also with single women and lesbian couples who were going through sperm donation. And that book is coming out in the fall. And I'm about to embark on a research project to explore egg donors in the United States and Spain.
And this work is really important because I don't think people realize exactly how many babies are born from egg donation and sperm donation. So your work is quite pioneering. There just isn't enough of it.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. I think that it's starting to become more popular to do this kind of work, but I started this back in the 1990s, so I definitely had this long-term perspective on this subject and have seen a lot of changes in the industry and people becoming parents over the last 25 plus years.
Yeah, and you're you're an anthropologist.
Yes, a medical anthropologist.
Medical anthropologist. And what is that? What's a medical anthropologist?
Well, that's a good question. Basically, in a nutshell, it's medical anthropologists study cross-cultural beliefs and practices surrounding health and illness. Okay. So that's sort of a broad scope. And also within that, there's a number of different threads that a person can investigate. So for example, I have some colleagues who have done a lot of research on HIV in Africa, for example, or here. My own research obviously is on fertility and fertility-related issues and meanings of family, how we think about kinship, how technologies are influenced by and also influence society. Yeah. Other people have looked at things like folk healing methods in the Amazon or something. So there's a wide range of possibilities, which makes it really exciting because you can easily just choose a new research topic and then still stay within the same field. So,
right, but I imagine in the 90s even, like doing research on sperm donation, people were like, what is that? So what made you get into that field?
Well, that's really interesting. I was a new graduate student at Berkeley. This was about 1989. And I ended up getting hired for a research assistant position with Gay Becker, Professor Gay Becker. And she was very involved in doing research on infertility and wrote a book called Healing the Infertile Family, The Elusive Embryo, and a number of other books. And she was conducting a research project that looked at gender differences in response to infertility. So as part of that project, I started interviewing, and that project only looked at heterosexual married couples because at the time, infertility was defined as trying to conceive for a year or more unsuccessfully. So I interviewed couples about their experiences deciding to use an egg donor or a sperm donor and also some of the struggles that they went through as part of her project. Now at that time also single women and lesbian couples were calling up to volunteer for their project, but they were outside the scope of the research study. And so I thought, wow, what an interesting subject. I had never really thought about lesbian infertility or single women infertility, for example. And so rather than turning them away, I thought, okay, this would make an interesting project. So I started interviewing the women for my research, and I was really interested in how people thought about donors and how lay perceptions of genetics influence donor choice. And so that was sort of the main thread in my dissertation research. And then once I finished that dissertation, I ended up getting a social science research council sexuality research fellowship.
Okay.
Trying to say that 3 times fast. And that was to look at, specifically to look at sperm donors in the sperm banking industry. And so I was able to make those connections between women's experiences, the sperm banking as a business and sort of technologies and changing meanings of family, and then donors and their experiences and their motivations becoming sperm donors.
Yeah.
So,
and then what about the countries Iran and Spain? Like, how is that part of your work as well?
Well, that's really interesting. So the Iran work goes way back to when I first took a medical anthropology class in 1984.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, one day I was sitting there in class, and I had had some Iranian friends at the time, and I had seen what they had gone through as recent immigrants in a relatively hostile climate. And I also saw sort of what was presented in the media versus the people that I knew, and saw that there were dramatically different worlds in terms of what we see in the media versus what people actually experience. So I was sitting in my medical anthropology class one day, and I'm like, someday I'm going to become a medical anthropologist, and I'm going to go to Iran and do field research on women's health issues in a village. Wow. And it just kind of dawned on me. Yeah. And it was finally 20-something years later, after I filed my dissertation, after I finished my postdoctoral research, that I finally had this opportunity to do a public health tour of Iran. And so I went there, and I looked at family planning issues and perceptions and use of family planning among Afghan refugees and low-income Iranians, and lived there for 6 months as a single mother with my 2 young sons, and had an amazing time. It was a really, it was one of the pinnacles of my professional and personal life as well.
So if we want to read some of that work, where can we find it?
Well, a lot of it's published in academic journals. If anybody out there is a book publisher and wants to take a chance on a book on Iran, I'm pitching it here. I do have a book that I've written about Iran, and I made many return trips between 2001 and 2006. It's called Iran with My 2 Sons, and it's sort of a counterpoint to the Not Without My Daughter theme.
Interesting.
And but I have had a hard time finding a publisher here in the United States that wants to publish it.
Well, you know, both my parents were born in Tehran. I don't know if you knew that.
Okay.
I'm Assyrian, which is a small minority ethnic group. Yeah. And, you know, my grandfather owned one of the largest maternity hospitals in Iran.
No kidding.
Called Avazadeh General Hospital, which is my last name. So maybe we can co-write that book together.
That would be
kidding.
Great.
You've already written it, but
I
might know some people.
Okay. I can at least publish it in Persian, you know?
Yes, exactly. So what was your field work in the United States?
So my field work in the United States initially was the sperm banking and single women and lesbian couples and using donor sperm in the 1990s. Then I went to Iran in 2001, 2, 4, and 6. And within that time, I was also working here. And then as I was a single mother throughout that time, and it was very difficult trying to find a place, make it in academia as a single parent. And I ended up leaving academia for a number of years and worked in nonprofit. Okay. So the nonprofit work took me to the Palestinian territories. It took me, you know, around the world to, and many other places to do some of the work that I was doing collaboratively with some of these other organizations. And then it was finally in 2014, now that my children are older, I thought, okay, I really have always been a researcher. I've always wanted to be a researcher. And so I returned to UC San Francisco to start my research on egg donors.
Wow, and they're so lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you.
They really are. And so what is the most interesting thing you learned about the sperm donor industry?
Wow, there's so many things. The thing that I found really interesting, actually, was how men manage their lives vis-a-vis their work as a sperm donor. Okay. And so I found that, you know, for example, their sex lives and trying to incorporate this being a sperm donor and regulate their own bodies. And so that I found really fascinating. Some of the other things that I found really interesting was how people choose donors, of course, so like how women make decisions to choose donors. And in the book, I talk about what I call grassroots eugenics and sort of these individualized interpretations of what is genetic fused with personal ethics and politics. And so, for example, I spoke to one lesbian couple who didn't want to use a German donor because of Nazi Germany. And they didn't want to have, even though neither one of them were Jewish. And then I spoke to another couple who were wanted to use a known donor because they were really concerned about having a multi-ethnic donor that they couldn't find in sperm banks at the time. So I worked in different sperm banks. So I did some field work in the Sperm Bank of California. I also what was called the Repository for Germinal Choice in Escondido at the time, which was sort of this genius sperm bank, as everybody's called it. And then I also did some research at what used to be called the Rainbow Flag Health Services, which was a sperm bank that was that emerged to help lesbian and gay parents create their families through sperm donations. So they had gay donors and lesbian or bisexual recipients.
And so when you talk about the book, you're talking about romancing the sperm.
Right.
I love that title. Where did that title come from?
Well, that's actually an interesting story. I was in a dissertation writing class, and I was talking about how women, many of the women in my study, created these fantasies about the donor, and having these ideas about, for example, there was one woman who was talking about wanting to meet her child's donor at some point in the future when the child reaches 18. But she hadn't even conceived yet. And she had all these fantasies about who this donor was based upon his profile, the books that he read, that they would have things in common and so on. And she was looking for that commonality, and she was looking for some sort of relationship in an alien space. Yeah. And she even had this idea that the donor and her child that was yet to be even conceived and her would someday meet and be at the child's graduation together and actually hit it off and have a relationship.
I see.
And so
that almost never happens.
And that almost never happens. I think
there's
there's a Hollywood movie about it or something.
Exactly.
And so somebody in my dissertation group, Glenn, he said, wow, that's kind of like romancing the sperm. And I'm like, that's my title. So I have to give him credit. You know, Glenn Shepard. Yeah. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Glenn. And then why do men, I mean, we know why women use donor sperm, but why do men donate sperm?
It's a range of reasons. So some, obviously, the compensation is a motivating factor. Another reason is, and I kept hearing this over and over and over again from many of the donors of, I have great sperm, I have great genes, and it's sort of my responsibility to pass them on. So sort of that vested interest of genetic continuation. And then also others were like, I have a sister that's going through infertility, and she had to use an egg donor, and so I thought I'd pay it back by helping somebody and being a sperm donor. So it's a mixed range of issues.
So what kind of advice would you give a woman who's looking at a sperm donor, and what kind of advice, what kind of things should she be looking for?
Well, I mean, basically, good swimming sperm is the first thing. You know, are there other conceptions or other pregnancies, successful pregnancies that have been achieved from that donor sperm? And clinically and medically, that's the most important thing. And I've seen women, especially when they're going through infertility, they start off with a whole laundry list of ideas of I want to have this and tall and blah, blah, blah. And after a year or so of trying to conceive and purchasing the sperm again and again and again, they finally get to this point where it's like, just give me good swimming sperm. Bottom line, I just want to get pregnant. So that those notions of what they want and that list of ideals changes from beginning to end. So I think, obviously it's a personal decision, and that's what I found with most of the women that I chose. It was so idiosyncratic in terms of what they found appealing in a profile. And one of the things that I find really interesting in this whole thing is that with egg donors, you get all this visual information.
Oh, totally.
Right? Yeah. You get all the profiles and the pictures and the baby pictures.
And you can even go back and ask for pictures that aren't there.
Right. And you can ask for more pictures, you can get bathing suit shots if you want, and so on. So there's all this information that's out there. But with sperm donors, you get, a 2-page profile. And you get virtually no images. And so that way in which gender is present or not present in the sperm and egg banking or egg donation industries are really interesting to me. Why is it that we wouldn't have visual information about the sperm donor? I'd want to know what he looks like.
I mean, it's a huge gender gap. I mean, as far as, the difference between sperm donation and egg donation. And for women who are facing these infertility challenges and have to then go to either egg donation, sperm donation, or both, what do you think emotionally are the biggest challenges for women based on your research?
Well, it depends on if it's using an egg donor or a sperm donor, and I find that the experiences of people using a sperm donor are dramatically different than the people who are using an egg donor. So for single women, first, what I found is that they had to let go of the idea of finding the perfect partner to have a child with. Now, with lesbian couples, it's obviously very different. They want to have a child with their partner, so of course sperm donation is the way that they're going to have to do it. But with single women, there's often that are straight or bisexual or lesbian for that matter, there's often having to come to terms with the fact that specifically with heterosexual men, that they're not going to find the right partner in time to be able to conceive
with them.
Right. And so this is sort of like, I'm turning 35. I don't want to miss my chances. And this is back in the 1990s before we had egg freezing.
Right.
But so this was sort of like, it's either now or never.
Right.
And so that's what I saw back then.
Right. So tell me about your movie, The Perfect Donor.
Yeah. So The Perfect Donor, it's about egg donation. And I came to the film out of my research. And after hearing egg donors' stories and realizing there's so little information out there to inform people about what this is all about. There's a lot of films out there about infertility. There's even films out there on sperm donation to some degree. Hollywood films, as well as films about documentaries about people trying to find their donors and so on. But there's very little about egg donation. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to take the knowledge that I've gained through my research and put it into a media that currently doesn't exist to the degree that I think it should.
Right.
So I think it opens those conversations.
It does, and I'm thinking that anyone who's considering an egg donor should probably watch your documentary as well. So that they don't look back and say, like, why didn't I know that those kinds of things can happen?
Right. And there's ways that people can look out for their donors and advocate for their donors as they're going through the process, or ways that they can make the process easier or more personal. So for example, from all the stories that I've heard, I mean, obviously again, it's very personal, but from all the stories that I've heard from both donors and recipients in all these years of doing this research, and the donor conceived kids, being open seems to work best for everyone in most cases. So donor conceived kids often have curiosity about their biological, who helped make them. Donors often have curiosity about what happened with my eggs. And
they may not think they have the curiosity at that point, but 10, 15, 20 years down the road, they do. They actually ask those questions. And I've even had women 45 now on another partner, with another partner, and their partner, let's say, doesn't have biological children, they do from the past, and they were also egg donors. They sometimes ask the question, I wonder if there are eggs left over from my egg donation.
Oh, interesting.
And it's, back then, there weren't programs like Freeze and Share, and that's actually the reason why I started freezeandshare.com. For those of you who don't know this website, it's a way for you to choose an egg donor, have the option of being open, and then as a gift to the egg donor, you're going to freeze half the eggs for her and pay for 5 years of storage, but at the same time, her compensation will be that gift of freezing eggs for her. So hopefully more people will know about that, take advantage of it, and watch your documentary as well.
Yeah, it's not done yet. I'm still trying to raise funding to finish it.
But we're going to play a clip right now.
I was in Barbados, and a friend of mine, a friend of a friend of a friend, like just randomly, she was like, I donated my eggs maybe 2 years ago. And I started talking to her about it. It was just the most random thing in the world. And I told her, I was like, I want to do that. I find a lot of females in medicine, or females that are, more career minded or want to do something other than, have children, right? They start wrestling with this, which one is more important? Is my studies or a family, like those things? Is it more, which one do I want to dedicate more time to? I don't know if I'll ever be in a position where, I physically give birth to a child, but like egg donation, to me, it is, you get to have a child, quote unquote, have a child, but then give it to somebody that you think will parent it better than you.
So tell me, what's the clip about?
So this clip just deals with one woman's story and one question of why did you donate your eggs? What drove you to become an egg donor? And her story is, as a physician, she was a medical student at the time, she wasn't sure if she would actually have the time to both be a good doctor and be a good parent. And so for her, egg donation was a way of helping other people have children, because she didn't know if she was going to have them on her own. So again, it's a little bit of the genetic contribution, and continuing her, genetic line, so to speak. But also feeling like, well, I'm not using my eggs. I don't know if I ever will. So let somebody else use them, kind of thing. And every single woman that decides to become an egg donor, again, has a different story. But this is one clip that I had up on the National Infertility Awareness Week.
Okay, great. And then do you have stories of women who donate their eggs and have egg donor regret?
I do, actually. Yeah. I've got a whole range of stories. As many as there are people, there are experiences.
That's very true.
It's so I definitely have both.
And for women who actually need to use an egg donor to grow their family, if that's the path that they choose, what kind of psychological leaps does a woman need to make in order to get there and be able to do that?
Yeah, that's really interesting because when you're faced with the decision of not being able to use your own egg and your own genetic material to have your child, it can be obviously a very traumatic and heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching experience. And coming to terms with that loss is, I think, the first step to moving forward. And in my years of also researching people going through infertility, I noticed that when a lot of the women that were thinking about using egg donors had extremely selective criteria as to exact specifications of how their donor needed to be, it was often wanting control in a situation where they felt out of control, but also possibly not ready to go forward with using an egg donor yet because they were so picky that there was nothing that was going to meet their criteria.
Exactly.
And so I think that before moving forward with an egg donor, people have to feel comfortable with that decision and come to terms with that genetic loss, so to speak.
Yeah, and we talked about what we look for in a good sperm donor, lots of fast swimmers. And what about an egg donor? What are those qualities?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people like to choose proven donors because somebody who's already had a pregnancy. A lot of people want to see that she's had some sort of reproductive success. And then, but again, the requirements that I hear over and over again, people want blonde hair, blue-eyed donors, or they want donors with a high education. And the thing is that a lot of these traits, yes, hair color and eye color are genetic. Education, if you have if your donor has an MIT degree, it doesn't necessarily mean that your child's going to go to MIT. There's environmental factors as well. And so there's a lot of things that you really can't control for. And I think it's just mostly just going forward with being comfortable with somebody. And also just from the donor's perspective, and having spoken to a lot of donors, I know a lot of donors that have been so-called popular donors and been encouraged to do back-to-back cycles in a rapid succession. And I don't necessarily think that that's in the best interest of the donor's health because it's it's not giving their body a break to get back to normal and get back to regular cycle and so on. So I think those are some things that if somebody's going to be using a donor, they need to think about in terms of taking care of the person who's helping you.
Right. So I get to know my patients quite a bit on a personal level, and I find that doing in-person interviews with the egg donor and really getting to know them and making sure that they're a good personality match and also a good physical match, so I can do photo matching as well. So I work with great agencies that allow me to talk to donors, screen them, even do fertility testing ahead of time so that patients feel like they know more about the donor before they actually commit to using the donor. And then, for example, today I had my donor meet the recipient. Her retrieval is going to be in a couple days, and they just met. Of course, we talked about it in advance about how it would feel, and they met with a psychologist as well before they did it. But the egg donor said, "Wow, this is the first time anyone ever asked to meet." And I said, "Oh no, that's kind of how I roll. I want to talk. I feel like the world's a better place when we're kind of all united and there's just more love to go around. And I mean, it's not for everybody.
And the human connection. And I know, like, this is one thing I hear a lot from donors is not wanting to feel like they're just an egg machine. They want to feel like what they're doing is meaningful, and they want to feel like there's a human connection, and so they really appreciate it. From all the donors that I've spoken to, they really appreciate it when somebody's at least written them a note, given them a gift, and if they want to meet or talk on the phone, it makes their day, because then they know that what they're doing makes a difference for somebody else.
Right. I mean, they're giving the gift of life. I mean, it's like being a bone marrow transplant or a living organ donor. I mean, you hear stories of people who've done things like that, and then they love receiving letters or finding out that the person was able to live an extra 3 years. I mean, look, an egg donor is literally giving the gift of life by, giving so much of herself. I mean, a sperm donor just watches a movie and does something in a cup. Not as invasive.
Not an egg donor. There's a lot to go through.
donor.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key challenges an egg donor goes through in the egg donor industry?
Well, one of the things that I see that I've seen happen is for example, they can have in terms of medical complications. Some of the things that I've seen, I've had more donors than I expected experience ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and every clinic and every doctor has a different protocol and is different, and I would really like to see more research on donor outcomes, and there's been very little about that, and I think that donors don't really have a lot of information to inform their decisions, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing the work that I do.
Right.
And they don't know necessarily, a lot of them are young, they might not necessarily know how to negotiate contracts or how to ask questions and be taken seriously.
And how to look out for themselves. I've heard of, there's some doctors out there who refuse to do a lupron trigger. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's a way of preventing severe ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And so if an egg donor is walking into a clinic like that, she might be setting herself up for some very serious major complications. So hopefully with more education, with people watching this show, reading your book, watching your movie, then they're going to feel better about going into an egg donor situation, knowing what to ask for and what kinds of things they can be doing to prevent serious medical complications. So congratulations on your big research grant.
Thank you. Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, the project is going to be exploring egg donation in the United States and Spain. And it's looking at, because US and Spain have very different policies. So Spain is very regulated and donors only get paid a compensation of about €1,000, and anonymity is required, which is really interesting to me because
anonymity is required.
Anonymity is required, right? So it's very interested in how these different types of
decisions. That's very like 1985,
right?
Yeah.
And doctors choose the donors; the patients don't choose their own donors.
And there's no such thing as anonymous. I mean, if you get a photo of someone, that person immediately, Facebook facial recognition software, it can tell you who they are, who their mother is, where they live. I mean, all those things.
Yep. And then also the direct-to-consumer genetic testing.
Of course.
So I know a lot of donors and donor-conceived children that have actually found each other through the direct-to-consumer genetic testing, like 23andMe and so on. So that's going to be really interesting to look at how these different policies in these two different places affect how donors think about the process and the genetic connection to their biological children and potential for even future relationships, and how these different sort of economic and regulatory settings may impact donors' experiences differently in these different places. So
you're kind of like the guru of making modern families. I mean, I don't know anyone who's done more research in this space than you, who's more published than you. So we're so lucky to have you in the Bay Area, and especially on this show.
Thank you.
So we're going to be looking out for your movie.
Yeah.
The Perfect Donor. The documentary is going to come out hopefully soon.
As soon as I can get the funding to pay an editor and get it done.
Okay. Yeah. And then your book, Romancing the Sperm. When is that coming out?
That's going to be out in November for sure.
November for sure.
And it can be pre-ordered right now.
Awesome. So we're going to look forward to seeing you on that book tour and promoting your book as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tober, for being on the show tonight, Making Modern Families with Donor Eggs and Sperm. So please tune in to the next Egg Whisperer show, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.